Welcome to PowerUp podcast, the podcast that seeks to empower and dismantle, giving us the power and confidence to question, deconstruct, rebuild, and expand in life. I'm your host, AmaRouge, voiceover and multidisciplinary artist, well-being advocate, food and book geek with over 14 years of movement-centered experience.
I am your host, Mesma, artist, choreographer, yogi and coach with a passion for alchemy, creativity, transformation and workplace wellness.
We recognise that we can't dismantle and empower or be empowered without first learning ourselves, diving deeper to unlearn the harmful, restrictive and unprogressive. It's an ongoing practice and journey for us all, which is why we created this podcast.
Our show features guests doing the work to enlighten, deconstruct and power up in their own magical ways.
We're going to be having conversations around the power of healing, transformation, well-being and creativity, and how they feed our personal and collective evolution, how they help us power up. Ta-da!
Bam, 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 bam. Amma and Ella, over, or rather, beginning. Today we're talking about yoga and activism. And for me, there's this beautiful discovery on my yoga journey that activism, just like boundaries, are things that can be connected to love. And that for me, yoga, the yoga part of my life is every part of my life that I bring presence and attention to. And kind of thinking about the principles of Ahimsa. So just to kind of summarize that is this respect for all living things and this avoidance of violence towards ourselves and towards other people. That for me, yogaing, like bringing yoga into all aspects of my life is looking at that. So maybe that's, I still say I eat vegan because I still know that every now and again, either I'm overcome by the craving to eat an egg, or I go to a dinner party where the only option is vegetarian and I prefer to kind of participate, but it's kind of like I'm doing the best that I can at the moment. But this beautiful journey, even what we've been speaking about in terms of slow fashion, for example, even slow living, kind of all of the aspects of PowerUp podcast for me really are about yoga. They're about union and they're about awareness of how we are behaving and how that impacts ourselves and other people.
Yeah, it reminds me of there's a practice that I do, a yin practice that I do with Felicia Tomasco, who I have to say her name like that because that's how she says her name on that practice, and I love it. And when she's leading us into the yin practice, before we kind of go deeply into the class, she talks about life feeling like a tightrope that we're continuously walking. She says sometimes life can feel like this tightrope that you're walking, you're trying to balance, you're trying to not fall off, and actually beneath you there are raging crocodiles, so you're trying not to fall into the raging crocodiles that are swirling, and you're holding something on one side and holding something on the other. And because life can be like this, how do we find ourselves within it, and how do we find our way through it with a sense of groundedness and awareness, and so that we're not reacting constantly to everything. And I love it because then she comes to yin and she says, well, what we learn here on the mat and what we learn in this class and what we discover about ourselves and the ways we learn to regulate ourselves are all the ways that we can transfer into life, because life is often walking that tightrope. And it's one thing learning all of this through yoga and on your mat and practicing it here, but then if you go out into the world and you're stuck in a traffic jam and you're cursing because you want the light to turn green and it's not going fast enough because you're late for this thing, none of that is taking what you're learning in yoga and actually integrating it into your everyday life. And it is a continuous practice. It's not just about what happens on the mat. And I remember the first time I heard her say that, I really thought, gosh, yeah, it does extend beyond this. And it's in those moments where you get really heightened that is the key time to go back to yoga and what yoga is. And actually, am I practicing that right now? And what is actually going to help me get through this? Cursing is not going to make the light turn green quicker. It's not going to make me get to where I want to go quicker. What can I actually do here? Maybe deep breathing, maybe parasympathetic breathing is actually going to help me here. Maybe dropping into myself and embodying some of the principles I learn in yoga are actually what's going to help me in this moment. And so I think for me, there's a lot of that realizing and connecting um, in the fact that, yeah, yoga is every day and it's in everything, and we're human, right? So we're fallible and we can get activated, and sometimes we need to pause
Yeah.
before we come back to that. And it's not a pursuit of perfectionism, and I want to be really clear that that's not what I'm advocating for.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to add. I think often we confuse kind of like pushing down our emotions and not being mean or angry, or not being the thing, with that kind of principle of using the breath and so on to come back into a state of homeostasis or a state of relaxed. And
Mm,
for me, it doesn't mean that I should push down what I'm feeling and oppress it and hold that in my system. For me, yoga
absolutely.
is emotions in motion. It's releasing that stuff so that
Yes.
actually maybe eventually we genuinely don't get frustrated,
Yeah.
but that we can use the techniques so that we come home to ourselves, so we feel really at one and whole in our body, and so that these external factors don't affect us. And for me, I always feel like Nelson Mandela in prison as an image is like the ultimate yoga of, obviously I wasn't there, but I really feel that he kind of embodied this practice of using breath and using meditation and being in a state of bliss, essentially in a really awful situation, but being
Mm,
able to kind of like bring that yoga into such an extreme place as prison. um yeah, is just so inspiring.
yeah,
And
very.
yeah, and I think this is just such a gift of yoga. I think yoga has, it really has changed my life. If I think back to like when I began, so I began yoga at Leeds University, those free yoga classes they had at lunchtime.
Mm,
Um, and I just used to go every single day because it was free, and I probably was a very lost student.
mm,
I always felt a kind of a strong sense of like, I don't really belong here. I don't really know what I'm doing at uni other than ticking the box of doing what I was told by by family. But yoga was that focus. And
I love
then,
that.
yeah, so grateful for it. And then after my dance training, my yoga teacher, the wonderful Abby Hoffman, gave me a scholarship to train to become a yoga teacher. And it was kind of specific, like really aimed at dancers and aimed at dancers also using yoga within dance. So it's almost like yoga chose me, because I had never thought I'm going to be a yoga teacher. Um, and so now, like I counted, and since then I've done, I think, 5 different kind of yoga teacher training courses, and like continuing to dive deeper. But I feel like right now I'm really in this space of also questioning, is this mine to be practicing? Um, my as a person who doesn't have a lineage, like an ancestry connected to
Mm,
yoga, the yoga lineage, as far as I
mm,
know. Although again, something I'm really fascinated in is um, there's a lot of evidence around like the connections with Kundalini and the Orishas and Yoruba practices, and there's also a lot of evidence that brings yoga right back to Kemet. Um, so perhaps that's my sort of like, in terms of my
mm.
my yeah my lineage or my ancestry connection. But it's definitely a big question for me right now, and I feel that kind of all the things, well, I mean, there's so many things that have been appropriated. I know for me right now, this is part of my journey, is questioning those things. I'm doing this amazing course at the moment with Susanna Barkataki, who is of Indian British heritage based in Canada. And it's all about cultural appropriation within yoga and supporting people to kind of dive into these questions. And I think there's so many layers of these awakenings. Like, I think it was 2018 that I first did the course that accompanies Layla Saad's book, Me and White Supremacy. And I think we spoke about this before on the podcast, that my mum was like, as a mixed person, Ella, I don't think you need to do it. And I was like, actually,
Yeah,
I think
I
it's
remember.
really important that I do it because of the privileges that I experience as a light-skinned mixed person, and the layers of how we can just take that for granted and not really appreciate what's going on.
And that's definitely transferable, right, to something like teaching yoga and of course other
Yeah,
disciplines. And sometimes because of how you come into relationship with it, or when you come into relationship with it, you don't really think beyond being in relationship with it and all of the discovery that's happening and all of the healing that's
yeah,
happening and all of the,
totally.
but then you can get to a point where you suddenly start to ask these questions like, okay, how much of this am I allowed to access? And
Mm,
kind of how deeply and how much of it can I share? Is it mine to share? Do I even have the right to share it?
yeah,
And
yeah.
when if I do, when do I? When does that begin? And how? And I feel like actually these are all similar questions that I started not to take it anywhere else, but to show similarity, that I started to ask and have asked along the way with Samba. How
Mm,
much of this is in me, or how much is it mine to share?
mm,
Um, who am I allowed to share it with? Why am I allowed to share it? If I am allowed to share it, how do I share it? And why? And all of these deeper dive questions.
yeah,
Um, And I think it's important to ask ourselves these questions and arrive at answers, or at
me
least
too.
keep seeking the answers and keep sharing really openly.
I'm awaiting this book to arrive on Ella in the book collection. My goodness, it's an issue, but it's
We're going to have our library runs. Don't worry, it's all right.
right.
Yeah.
For those of you not sure, this is season 6, by the way, and we have 2 incredible episodes coming up with the amazing Diane Bondi talking about yoga and activism, and the amazing Nadia Galani. Yeah, the 2 of them, they're incredible episodes with lots and lots of food for thought and just really empowering conversations. But next season, we will actually be speaking with some more incredible guests and just broadening the topic out to cultural appropriation in general, um, looking at appreciation and appropriation and this wonderful word, arrogation.
Cannot wait for that. And if you are loving rocking with us and learning with us and unlearning with us and powering up with us, please do rate us wherever you're listening. And please do share and follow, because the more of you that do that, the more we can keep producing this podcast, the more wonderful unlearners it will meet, and the wider and broader and deeper the Power Up community gets. So please, please do.
Yes. Bringing it back to this book that hasn't arrived yet. It's called American Veda, From Emerson and the Beatles to Yoga and Meditation, How Indian Spirituality Changed the West. And
Wow.
yeah, super interesting. And again, this thing of like wanting to understand, me doing that journeying of like, why did it come to the West? And actually, like, if we kind of, well, from what I found out so far, it was this sort of this recognition that America and the West were broken and needed something, and that yoga was kind of seen as, this is how we can help people and we can actually
Mm,
change and heal the world. And so I think for me, when we go, or if that is the true, because okay, again, I'm still studying, I'm still on this path,
yeah.
then can we come back to that every time we teach,
Mm,
every time we step on the mat, in fact, in our daily
every time
lives,
we step out the door, right?
right? Or maybe even in our bedrooms, like wherever we are. But also you know, this thing of power and this like just real reverence for this incredible gift that is from India, that is from Kemet, is, you know, it has multiple spaces and places that it's from, um, but is essentially has been massively appropriated and
And commodified now in a huge way,
mm,
a multi-million
mm,
dollar industry, right?
yeah, yeah. And so yeah, how can we show appreciation but also respect for the lineage? And kind of for me, there's something about questioning like who we're learning from, why we're learning, you know,
Yes.
all of these aspects that
Yeah, absolutely. And especially as I am now in a place where I'm looking at teacher training with yoga, I'm really looking at who am I learning from? Where do I want to learn? Why do I want to learn with them? Etc. Etc. All of these questions.
Diane Bondi.
Diane Bondi's definitely in the mix.
Yeah.
Definitely. Definitely. But I
Yeah.
think I'm going to start my journey in India.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. That's going to be incredible. And I think that's probably, I'm still, again, you know, I'm so in this place of questioning. I
Mm,
haven't found my answer yet. I was planning to do that just before COVID, but now again, even that, I'm just questioning, um, is that true? And will I feel that I'm appropriating by doing that? I don't know. Yeah, there's
mm.
just so many beautiful layers unfolding, and I'm loving the course, and I'm loving.
The course sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I'm also loving how, you know, it's been a very natural process of how my life is kind of aligning more and more with my true nature and purpose. But how I'm being really called, like the love and the passion for yoga is actually strengthening, but alongside these ahimsa principles and is coming back to what is true and
Mm,
how do I honor and show my gratitude for something that has saved my life.
mm. Yeah, yoga is incredible. I can't. It's really interesting that you said that you found it at uni because that's when I discovered it as well. And I wish I had discovered those lunchtime classes because I didn't. But I bought a yoga.
Note to listener, we were at the same uni.
Yeah,
Whoop, whoop. That's how the love story
that
began.
is way back when.
Whoop, whoop.
I bought my first mat and blocks and a book, like a
Mm.
thick
What
textbook,
was
which
the
I
book
still
called?
have. I can't remember. It's downstairs
Not
on
the
my
same one as
shelf.
Diane Bundy.
No, not the same one. But it had all the images of how you can practice. So it was like step by step images. Um, and I wish I had used it. I didn't access it much then. It kind of just lived in the corner. And I then didn't actually begin my journey with yoga properly until 2015. So a long time after. But it is really interesting because it reminds me that it's been something that's been in my consciousness for a very, very, very long time, since 2002. And I remember having people around me who were, let's say, discouraging me um, from discovering it. And who knows, maybe that's why I actually ended up taking 13 years. Wow, till I actually from when I first discovered it until when I actually started practicing. But yeah, either way, here we are, and I'm so grateful for it, and I can't imagine my life without it. So yeah, it's absolutely necessary to honor where it's come from and to educate ourselves as much as possible and ask all these questions.
Question. I just would love to clarify. Do you mean 13 years before you started taking class, or do you mean 13 years before you decided to become a yoga teacher?
13 years before I started taking class. So I didn't start practicing until 2015, and I first bought my yoga stuff in 2002.
But isn't it interesting that little intuition? Like I remember around 16 or 17 wanting to know about meditation, wanting to do that. And yeah, you know, but not really understanding what it was and how we have these little intuitions of like, this thing will be amazing.
Yeah,
Um, and then to the journey, the beautiful path that we are on now.
yeah. So thankful.
Yes. What I'm also loving is how the kind of subtle layers of activism that, for example, the image you gave earlier of being in the car and not getting angry, or maybe feeling the anger and then actually being able to use the methods to bring your prefrontal cortex back online.
Yeah.
Of the activism that can lead to. And even, you know, like these small acts of activism, for example, eating vegan or recycling our packaging. Again, does that actually change? It change the world? They're all huge questions, right? But I still think that the beautiful activism of yoga is that we get to work on ourselves. And as a result of being true to ourselves, we know our values, we know our boundaries, and we can really show up in a way that creates change, positive change, inspires other people to come on this journey. And, you know, I think we'll have many less Trumps in the world if everyone did yoga.
Thank you for listening. You can connect to us and our guests via the links in each episode's show notes. Before you go, we invite you to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the goodness to come. And if you enjoyed today, perhaps tell a friend to tell a friend. We are always grateful for you, our listeners, for our fabulous guests, and to everyone who has contributed to and been a part of our journey here.
Our music is by Tomo Carter. Everything else is brought to you by us, the PowerUp Power Team.
I'm Mesma.
I am AmaRouge. And we are PowerUp Podcast.